Good morning to everyone out there, those that are listening in, those that have the opportunity to watch the live stream this morning. God has blessed us with a beautiful spring morning, although yesterday, if I would have closed my eyes outside, I would have thought we were in March, but today things are warming up and we have the opportunity to praise the Lord. God controls the weather. And so I try not to grumble about what comes in that way. And this morning, this Sunday, is Mother's Day, and I at times thought I have done quite a number of Mother's Day messages, but I thought it probably would not be very fitting to preach something else, because I feel that mothers have a tremendous responsibility in the homes in our homes, and maybe at times the difficult places where they can find themselves. And again, don't want the men to fall asleep, but there's a few things in our sharing this morning that you can glean from the message this morning as well. So bear with me. But I just had to, as I was studying for this, I just had to ponder a little bit. What happens and again, not everybody's called to motherhood. That's not universal, but if you're here this morning, and I had to ponder or consider a little bit what happens in our homes and some of the things that a mother contributes to the home. And so I left my mind ramble a little bit, and here's a few phrases that I penned regarding our home. Maybe the first one is it truly clean unless Mom says it is? I think a lot of you understand that. Yeah. Second one is, nothing causes a temporary mutation of deafness faster than when Mom says the dishwasher needs to be loaded. Maybe that's not quite universally true in our house, but it can happen. We have our gifts, and there's some that like that type of work more than others. And the one that probably happens the most, and maybe that I am guilty of myself at times, is there's a phrase I tell our children at times when they're looking for something. I say, look for it like your mom would. And then also along with that, I say, I've heard it been said, nothing is truly lost till Mom can't find it. So I believe you would, I think, agree with that pretty well. And like I said, I'm guilty of that at times too, that I say I just can't find it, and my wife goes and pages through what I had already previously looked at, and she finds it. And I guess as men we're not I don't know, we're blind, but we just need we don't have a knack. I don't have the knack to find things like my wife would, and I'll admit that this morning. So motherhood has a lot of different avenues and a lot of different responsibilities. And I would also like to suggest this morning it's not for the weak or the faint of heart. At times, motherhood is not easy. And whether you have a house full of toddlers, or whether you have teenagers, or maybe as grandparents, relating to your married children and your grandchildren. I don't know what that would be like, but maybe someday. So motherhood is something that is not always the most rewarding, although it has a lot of rewards. Although I'll never be a mother, of course, but as I try to support and walk beside my wife, and we try to decipher as a couple what's best for our family, and decide on direction or the things that we think are beneficial or spiritually and give direction for our family. It's not always easy to decipher what is best, but with God's help, I truly believe that as a father and a mother, that hopefully we have universally this morning as couples that are blessed with children and have family, that we would have, of course, the best interests for our children in mind, but not just in the here and now, but spiritually, of course, is where I would, as a father this morning, spiritually in our family, that in my life, I'm speaking for myself now, that is, of course, by far the most important aspect of our family life at home, that I hopefully am the most concerned about the spiritual vitality of our family. And as we reflect back, universally here this morning, we all had mothers, and quite possibly my own mother might be listening in this morning. Happy Mother's Day to you. And also reflect back to the mothers that we had, and we realize the difficult job or the responsibility they had at times to raise a family. And also I have at a few times I have told my wife that when things get pretty thick at home with family, I tell them, well, it's just unfortunate they have the same last name as the person that you married. So I mean, some of those things go on to the next generation, and I tell her that it probably comes maybe some of the makeup that I had as maybe Jane's family is a little more quiet, and my family is very verbal, and so that some of that makeup comes out in the next generation, and it's not. I have put my foot down and told. Usually I don't share about our family, but I have put my foot down and told them, you don't talk that way to your mother, and so I have at times made our children apologize, and so it's tough at times, and unfortunately, I believe most of you can identify to some extent to that. I'm not saying this morning by any stretch of the imagination that we have an unruly family, but we have a normal family, I think. And it's good to work together and to of course, like I said, spiritually giving direction to our family and trying to do the best our God-given abilities to take care of that avenue of our families. And I believe there's a lot of grandparents here. Their children are, there's some grandparents here listening in this morning. Their children are all gone, and it's back to the two of them, and they can reflect back and some of the times that they had and some of the things that they faced in raising a family and the difficult situations and the happenings in their lives that were not pleasant at the time. But I believe that God allows things in our lives that are difficult, not to tear us down, but to make us better individuals, a better person, and maybe with more compassion or more passionate about who we serve. So the title of this morning is A Mother's Compassion, and there's different mothers in the in the Bible that you could think about. The mother of Moses, or Moses and his sister Miriam, and the book of Ruth and Naomi and that story. But I like at times to mix it up some. Look at a few maybe situations or a few accounts in the Bible that are not quite as familiar, and maybe glean some things out of that. So I invite your attention to the first one, to 1 Samuel chapter 25 is where I would like to start this morning. 1 Samuel chapter 25. 1 Samuel 25. I believe at this time it doesn't say for sure. We're going to look at a lady by the name of Abigail, and I'm not sure at this time that she was actually a mother. It doesn't say that she is, but later on she was. But I want to draw a few parallels here as we read. We're not going to read the whole. It's a pretty long account. I'm just going to read a number of verses, then paraphrase some, and then jump back in the same chapter. But it's a very interesting read if you like history or like more of a daily dialogue of a family or of a happening. It's a pretty interesting read of 1 Samuel 25. But at this time, I would like to read verses 1 to 4 to kind of get the setting of what's happening here. 1 Samuel 25, verse 1, and Samuel died, and all the Israelites were gathered together and lamented him and buried him in his house at Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail, and she was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance, but the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. And David heard in the wilderness that Nabal did shear his sheep. We'll stop reading there for a minute. We're going to try to catch up to speed here. David and his band of men were kind of an outlaw, maybe not an outlaw, but they were, David was not king at this time, but David had a group of men with him, and he was, of course, a warrior, and he had these group of men with him, and he was in the wilderness, and previously to this account, at times he was in the same area that this man Nabal was grazing his animals and his sheep and his goats, and David and his band of men did not take unlawfully some of his cattle, some of his sheep, some of his goats for their food, to keep them for their sustenance, to feed themselves. But here in this account, where it starts off in 1 Samuel 25, here we have the account where David and his men get back into that area, or they hear that Nabal is out, and it's time to shear the sheep. And David and his men were, the young men that were with him, were hungry, and they would have desired for Nabal to have some of his animals, so they would have something to eat. So David sent some of his young men that were with him to Nabal to ask if they would share some of their cattle or some of their sheep, goats, some of their food with them. And Nabal, starting at verse 10, kind of gets an attitude and tells them, who is David? Or who is this son of Jesse? And why would you broke away from your master? And he basically accused David of being an outlaw, or basically is what he said. And why should I give you my bread? Why should I feed you with the flesh of my cattle? And he really got an attitude towards David's young men that he sent to ask him whether he would share of his food and his cattle for David and his men. Let's pick up again reading. So young men of David went there, and Nabal had an attitude. Let's start again at verse 12. So David's young men turned their way and went again and came and told him all those sayings. So David's young men came back, and David said unto his men, gird ye on every man his sword. And they girded on every man his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And there went up after David about 400 men, and 200 abode with the stuff. So there David said, you know what? He didn't share. He didn't ask when I asked a pleasant way to if he would share of his things. And the men, Nabal got an attitude, and so he told the soldiers there to gird up the sword. And we pick up reading again at verse 14. It says, but one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he railed on them. And so the word came back to Abigail that Nabal was not kind. Nabal was unkind to them, and Nabal was not willing to share. And so Abigail finds this out, and she springs into action because somehow she knew that the outcome of this was not going to be good. And we'll pick up reading again at verse 18. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 bottles of wine and 5 sheep ready dressed and 5 measures of parched corn and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on asses, and said unto her servants, Go on before me, behold, I come after thee. But she told not her husband Nabal. So she takes the opportunity, she takes the initiative. She finds out that David was probably going to come and take, or going to come and destroy. So she gets some of her I believe her maid servants together. I don't think she did this all herself, because I think she did this I believe she kind of made haste. And we see the amount of food, and we see the amount of food that was loaded onto the donkeys that they were going to take out. So Nabal was out shearing the sheep, and she sprang into action, and she was going to do something about this request that David had made for food from them. And so she was a woman that took action. And we're going to pick up reading again at verse 23. This was when Abigail gets close to David. And when Abigail saw David, she hasted and lighted off the ass and fell before David on her face and bowed herself to the ground and fell at his feet and said, Upon me, my Lord, let this iniquity be, and let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak in thine audience, and hear the words of thine handmaid. Let not, my Lord, I pray thee, reward this man of Belial, even Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, the handmaid, saw not the young men of my Lord whom thou didst send. Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, seeing the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood, and from avenging thyself with thine own hand, now let thine enemies and they that seek evil of my Lord be as Nabal. And she continues on there and is explaining some of the things that she came and she presented this food to David, and she pleads for mercy. But I want you to notice one thing, that the word, the name Nabal basically means his name is how he is. That means Nabal means fool. Nabal responded very foolishly to the request of food. And it's not that Nabal, we understand Nabal wasn't a poor man. He was blessed. He was, he had tremendous possessions. We see that in verse 2 of the possessions that he had. He was a well-to-do individual. He would have had the sustenance, the food to easily supply David and his men with abundance. But we see the unwise or a choice that Nabal made, and David and his men were going to come, and they were going to destroy all the men that Nabal had. They were going to destroy. They were going to take with force because of the cruelty or the curlish or the attitude that Nabal had, that he wasn't going to share with him. But we see Abigail, she springs into action. She falls on her face before David, and she pleads the mercy. She says, just because, in my own words, I would say, just because my husband didn't show any compassion or any giving to you, she basically says, let this iniquity be on me. So she's really somewhat being exposing herself to David and these group of warriors that were with him. So she had quite the, how would you say? She had some spunk, or she wasn't afraid to try to make things right before these soldiers, these men would come and destroy her husband Nabal and his men. So she sprang into action. And as she did that, we see the response that David had. Let's go to verse 32. And David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me. And blessed be thy advice, and blessed be thou, which hast kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with mine own hand." And David continues on there, and he did receive of her hand the food and the blessing that Abigail offered to David. So we see here that as we read this portion of Scripture, of different verses here, what I really would like to draw out of this portion or this account in history here is that, yes, I believe that Abigail quite possibly was maybe younger than her husband, and that she, even though back in those days, quite possibly it could have been an arranged marriage, and that Nabal, the fact that he was well-to-do or well-to-do in riches, that he had the ability to provide the dowry or the price for this bride. And although the fact that she could have said, well, Nabal, he's cruel, or that word curlish there that we read in the beginning of the chapter is kind of means cruel, or it has the connotation of being a cruel person that doesn't have much compassion. But we see Abigail could have said, well, he's the one that snobbed David's men. He's the one that didn't agree to share with them. And so she sprang into action and did show kindness and compassionate, whether her husband did or not. And this morning, as we think about the idea of mothers and mothers having a more compassionate heart, or a more compassionate outlook maybe than us men do, and we see this prime example here that the female gender is naturally or most times more considerate or more gentle-hearted, and we see that displayed here in the life of Abigail towards the ill will, even though her husband had intended ill will for David or not going to share, but Abigail had compassion and she took the initiative. And if you read to the end of that chapter there, David, after she came back from, her husband didn't know it, she came back, and as Nabal was at a large feast and he overdid it with wine, and the next day Abigail told her husband David what she had done, and I think Nabal realized that the close call that was for his life, that it says that Nabal's heart turned to stone, or the thought was maybe he suffered a stroke or some health calamity. And 10 days after that, Nabal died. Nabal did not survive. His heart died within him, and he became as a stone. 10 days later, he died, and David heard the news of this, and David sent his servants to Abigail, and he inquired of her whether she would become his wife. And we see the response in verse 42, "And Abigail hasted and arose and rode upon an ass with 5 damsels that went with her, and she went with the messengers of David and became his wife." Abigail, the pleasant spirit that she had within her, David must have seen that. And as her husband died, we see that she was willing to, it doesn't say, it spells it out pretty clearly that Abigail was willing to hasted and arose, it says, to become the wife of David. So there we see that even though Nabal was not willing to share, we see that his wife came to his assistance, and that's how it is. Sometimes I think in my own life, at times some of the flat spots or some of the flat spots that I have, my wife comes and gives her feminine insight or perspective, and it just creates a well-rounded perspective. And as men, at times we don't, we might not possess the passion or the compassion that the female gender is that God has made him that way. God has gifted him that way. And I believe there's a reason to that he has done that. And we see that coming through very clearly in 1 Samuel, how Abigail was the mother to some of David's children later on, if you follow that history. Let's go back to 2 Samuel. I want to show you a mother's compassion. This was the account that I really thought about when I thought about a mother's compassion this morning, but it's not a very desirable account as we would think about it, but it does show the dedication of a mother. 2 Samuel chapter 21, did I say that already? 2 Samuel 21, and this is maybe a little bit more of a complete story. We're not going to read the entirety of it, but we're going to read the most part of it. We get Bible readers, you will recognize this account as well. And this was after, of course, David was king, and Saul was off the scene. David was king, and we'll pick up reading in verse 1 here of 2 Samuel 21. Then there was a famine in the days of David 3 years, year after year, and David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered, "It is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites." And the king called the Gibeonites and said unto them, this is David, "Now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites, and the children of Israel had sworn unto them, and Saul sought to slay them in his zeal to the children of Israel and Judah." Verse 3, "Wherefore David said unto the Gibeonites, What shall I do now for you? And wherewithal shall I make the atonement, that ye may bless the inheritance of the Lord? And the Gibeonites said unto him, We will have no silver nor gold of Saul, nor of his house, neither for us shalt thou kill any man in Israel. And he said, What ye shall say, that will do for you." This is David. He says, "Whatever you say, that's what I'll do for you." And they answered the king, "The man that consumed us and that devised against us that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the coasts of Israel, let 7 men of his sons be delivered unto us, and we will hang them up unto the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord had chose." And the king said, "I will give them." But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because the Lord's oath was between them, between David and Jonathan's son, the son of Saul. Remember the oath that Jonathan and David had made? That was the lame son of Jonathan. So that David spared him. But the king took the 2 sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bare unto Saul, Ammoni, and Mephibosheth, and the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up from Adriel, the son of Beraziel, the Helonite. And he delivered them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them in the hill before the Lord, and they fell all 7 together, and were put to death in the days of the harvest, in the days of the beginning of the barley harvest. And Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it for her upon the rock from the beginning of the harvest until the water dropped upon them out of heaven, and suffered neither the birds of the air to rest on them by day, nor the beasts of the field by night. And it was told David that Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Saul, had done. And we'll stop reading there for a moment. Here we have the unfortunate account of the Gibeonites coming to David. There was a breach in the trust of some of the commitments that were made to the Gibeonites, that they weren't going to be destroyed, and Saul violated that. And apparently God was not pleased with that, and we see that the famine was the result of that. A famine 3 years in a row, and David inquires of the Lord and said, what is going on? And God tells him, because Saul and his bloody house slew the Gibeonites. There was a violation of the decree or the commitment or what was made there. So there was famine in the land. So David, of course, being king, not wanting this famine to continue, invites the Gibeonites in, and he has this dialogue with them, what can be done. And the Gibeonites didn't want the gold, the silver, the money to be paid off for that, but then David says the question, well, what do you want? And he opens himself up and says, I will give it to you. And they told him they want 7 men of the lineage of Saul. And that's what happened. But the mother's compassion here is of the concubine of Saul, Rizpah. And we see that the devotion that she had, we see that in verse 10. She took the sackcloth and spread it for her upon the rock. And she was protecting these men that were hanged on the wall from the fowls of the air and from the beasts of the night, from getting to them. And she rested there for quite some time. And if you follow the wording there, the barley harvest history, as I looked into it, it would mean from late April to the coming of the rain would mean they're thinking October. So from late April to October, this daughter, Rizpah, was out there in the wild. She was exposed to the elements, but she was committed to the keeping of the fowls of the air and the wild beasts of the night from not devouring her sons or the other 5 that were also on the wall there. And she was committed to doing, and she was there for the long haul. I have no idea how she sustained herself, no idea how she could stay in the wilderness or stay out there somehow. She was out there. She was committed to the fact that she was not going to allow the fowls of the air to come and to devour the bodies of her beloved 2 sons that suffered this death for the transgression of towards the Gibeonites. And so she was out there. She was committed. She had compassion. I'm sure at times she wavered. I'm sure at times she wondered whether maybe it was worth it. And she was out there, and she was not, and I know that it was not creature comfort. It says that she spread her sackcloth upon the rock. And I understand that this was a difficult situation where she found herself in. But I believe it was only because of the love that a mother could have had for her sons that she stuck through thick and the thin and the beating of the sun, as she endured that for the sake of her sons which were dead, and kept the fowls of the air and the beasts of the field at bay, so they would not come and devour or destroy the bones or the bodies of these 7 men. Then we pick up, I like to read another verse, verse 12, and David, verse 11, maybe I did read verse 11. They told David what the concubine of Saul had done. And David went, verse 12, and David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan his son from the men of Jabesh Gilead, and at which he had stolen them from the streets of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hanged them. Then the Philistines had slain Saul in Gilboa. When David found out that Rizpah was out there protecting the bodies of these young men, he said he found passion in his heart. He went and he got Saul and Jonathan's bones, and he provided a proper burial for these 7 men, and also for Jonathan and for Saul, and he moved them and gave them a proper burial. But so he relieved Rizpah of her devotion, her vigil over the bodies of her sons there. And this morning, as you think about a mother's compassion or the sympathy or a pity that a mother has for her children, it's something that I believe God has instilled in mothers. I believe that if that's missing, it's something that it's not God-given that it's missing. We understand the animal kingdom. We understand that there's a lot of, not that I'm comparing humans with animals, but the animal kingdom, there's a lot of animal kingdom mothers that will fight to the death to protect their young. And so it is that's a God-given instinct. Animals do things by instinct and how they are made up. And I believe this morning that God has instilled into the hearts of mothers that have a living soul a desire the best for their children and the best for their sons and their daughters, and to provide for them and to provide a environment where they can thrive in. And that, of course, we have a common enemy, the devil, that would want to disrupt any Christian home. So we are as a people, as Christians, fathers and mothers here this morning, we are in the sights of our common enemy, the devil, if we endeavor to have Christian homes and endeavor to instill into our children the love of God and spiritual vitality. And God and the devil knows if he can destroy a home or destroy the relationship of any of us, fathers or mothers, that he has a foothold into our homes and also a foothold into the lives of our children, the next generation, the lives of those that he would want to destroy before they ever start a home of their own, and that type of thing. So it is with motherhood. Like I said, motherhood is not an easy task. It's not something that everyone is called to, but I believe as God gives you opportunity, that you can speak into the lives of other people, whether you are a mother or not. Those that are single within our circles, you have the opportunity to maybe speak into the lives of your nieces and nephews and show them what it means to be content and to serve the Lord where God has placed you, and be patient and allowing yourself to be used in whatever way God has for your life. And also, as we think about a woman that had, I want to go to one account in the New Testament quickly. Let's go to Mark chapter 14, showing compassion. Mark chapter 14, I would like to read a few verses here. This is recorded in the different accounts of the Gospels. The different Gospels, and this I just chose to read the one out of Mark 14. If you're there, I'd like to read verses 1 to 9, or 3 to 9. This is verse 3. And being in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of anointment of spikenard, very precious, and she brake the box and poured it on his head. And there were some that had indignation within themselves and said, why was this waste of ointment made? For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence and had been given to the poor, and they murmured against her. And Jesus said, let her alone. Why trouble ye her? For she hath wrought a good work on me. For ye have the poor with you always, and whensoever ye will, ye may do them good, and me ye have not always. She hath done what she could. She is come aforehand to anoint my body to the burying. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, this also that she hath done shall be spoken of her for a memorial of her. Here we have a lady. Here we have, I think only the account in John would say it was Mary, the sister of Lazarus. But here in the other Gospels, it doesn't give any name for sure who this lady was. But we see that she had the ointment. She had that was very costly. And I believe as I looked at that, it would say that the 300 pence would basically be maybe to the equivalent of 300 days' wages. So it was very costly. It was something that was very precious. And of course, she received some flack or some criticism from the disciples. You know, you could have sold this and helped the poor. And Jesus, in his compassion towards Mary, said, you know, it's not that Jesus was downplaying that we don't help the poor. We don't need to say, well, the poor. Jesus said, don't help the poor. He says, the poor will always be with you. There's always going to be poor. It doesn't matter how we would structure society. There's always going to be poor. Jesus said the poor are always going to be with you. But me, I'm not always going to be with you. She has done a good work. She has done an excellent work. She has anointed my body before burial. And of course, the disciples at this point didn't understand that this was actually true, how true that actually was. But we have in all the accounts, the verse 9, that wherever this gospel is preached, wherever this gospel is shared, that this woman, the mention should be made of her, that this is a memorial of her. Her generosity, her love, her compassion for Jesus Christ, her compassion. And I believe Jesus, it was Mary, that he had done a great work for her. She realized that who he was. She realized that he was the Messiah, that he was who he said he was. And she had the compassion in her heart to take this precious ointment and to pour it, here it says, pour it on anoint the head of Jesus. The John account, I think it says, anointed his feet. But regardless of where Jesus was anointed, and even though she got criticism for the kind act or the compassion that she showed to Jesus, we need to realize that Mary, Jesus himself said, this is a memorial to her. This is a memorial for her, of her kindness that she did. So this morning, as we think about mothers and their compassion that they have and have on society and their own household and reaching out to others, it is good that God seen it fit that, back in the garden when Adam was not complete. Adam didn't have the gifts that Eve had, and to make Adam, the helpmeet that he needed. And this morning, the household where you grew up, or where you were raised in, or the household that you have established, or God has allowed you to have today, do you recognize the gifts that each of us bring to the family? The gifts of the mothers or the female gender, the gifts that they bring of allowing that to produce an environment where hopefully things are in good order and in good, and the children, it's a place where children can thrive in the environment. So this morning, as we share on mother's compassion, but I need to for mothers, all mothers this morning, to consider one thing though, as we think about motherhood. If you're called to that in life, I would like to ask you a question that I want you to ponder. And as husbands, you can help your wife at this. I'd like to ask you the questions, mothers, what is important in your life? And I had to think about that myself. The childhood that I had as a child, it was not the nicest house, the best meals, or the things that my parents could provide for me that meant the most to me. Our children will remember the care and compassion and the security as Christian parents, fathers and mothers. That's what I remember. Today, years later, that's what I cherish now. It wasn't the things that mom and dad bought or didn't buy for me, the things I thought I really needed or wanted, mostly needed probably. I thought I needed. That wasn't, years later, I look back and I say, well, that wasn't important. But today, as mothers and mothers in a home, a lot of our mothers have access to the world at their fingertips. And I would like to ask you, do you have the discipline in your life to make sure that your family that God has given you, your children that God is blessing you with, do you have the time and the energy, and to maybe put some of those other things that are not quite as important, those things that we have at our fingertips that we can follow after, whatever interests us, and put the needs of the children that have a living soul in front of some of the other things in life, where in the end spiritually doesn't benefit us as families at all. And as for all of us, as we think back to God's word is true, honor father and mother. And as a closing verse, 2 verses here I'd like to read Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 and 9, it says, Solomon said this, he said, my son, hear the instruction of thy father. Father's helping. And forsake not the law of thy mother. There's a team there. Forsake not the law of thy mother. What's it going to do for you? For they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head and chains about thy neck. It'll bless you. Honor them. Honor them today. If you have opportunity, and I understand, Brother Stanley, today you don't have the opportunity to honor his mother. She went on real recently to glory, and some of us don't have the opportunity to honor, but think about it. What is important in life, and what in the end will make the difference? If you have opportunity today to hear the instructions of the Father and forsake not the law of thy mother, you are truly a blessed individual being raised in an environment of a godly home. And a lot of us have been, and let us not forget the benefits that come with that. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. God, this morning, again, you have allowed us in this day and age, in this